So I reached over on my shelf and I picked up a book and stood with it in my hand and prayed, Lord, help this book to be a blessing to Ryan. And so I took the book out to the client information center, and I remember just throwing it on the desk and saying something like, "Here, Ryan, here's something to read. I think you'll enjoy it. Next week, tell me what you thought." And then I walked out the door and went home and prayed during the weekend that it would be a good experience.
Welcome to the Miracle Hill podcast, where we share raw stories and have honest conversations that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. We hope that these conversations uplift, encourage, inspire, and deepen your walk of faith, and expand your compassion for the last, the least, and the lost. Welcome back to the Miracle Hill podcast. In this episode, we are going to talk about evangelism with Bill Slocum. Breakthroughs are often the labor of patience and persistence. In this episode, Bill joins us to discuss how patient evangelism, listening, and presence can lead to life change. Let's jump into the conversation.
Hey, Bill.
Hey,
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
always good to see you.
So we got a weird situation. We've been doing this whole season with Michael at the table, facilitating the conversation, but Michael had a family emergency. So it's back to me. So you have to deal with me the whole time. What a blessing for you. Okay, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what your relationship to Miracle Hill is.
My name is Bill Slocum, and my first contact with Miracle Hill was through a tragedy. One of my children was in a basketball accident and had a traumatic brain injury. Back then, my wife had the better job, so she kept her job and I quit mine to take care of my son, who ultimately was going to look at missing a year of school. It was during that time that somebody approached me about employment with Miracle Hill, and I mentioned that my son needed some attention, and the guy that was doing the hiring said, "Well, just bring him with you." So my first job was at Miracle Hill Children's Home, and I think my first position there was, I was called the Director of Cottage Life.
Okay.
I ended up with several other positions, I guess, including I was the director when I left. Spent about 4 years at Miracle Hill Children's Home, and then moved to the Greenville Rescue Mission just a couple of years before 9/11. I think the dedication of the mission was September 11th, 2 years before New York and all of that. And I think my position was family and educational director. That was the first thing. Mission had opened some family apartments, or was going to open family apartments, and my job was to get them running and to create a family apartment ministry. Plus, we called them interns. They were actually students in what I would call a Bible school. And then I think I did some work on refining the Greenville Rescue Mission handbook. And through all of that, I spent, 14 years at the Greenville Rescue Mission. The absolute love of my life. I ended up there as the director, and then the position of vice president of adult ministries opened up in the corporate office, and I was asked to do that. And so that was the last 6 years or so of my official tenure. So 4 years at the children's home, 14 years at the mission, 6 years as vice president of adult ministries, and then I retired in 2018. And we were in the midst of a bit of a leadership transition at that time. And Reed Lehman came back to be the president of Miracle Hill for a second time. And he called me into his office and asked me to please come back on the payroll as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And so since 2018, I think, I've had the title of consultant, which means that I do several trainings on personalities and peacemaking and things like that. And am available if anybody needs to be consulted. I'm here.
So when you started at the children's home, did your son go with you?
He did.
For how long?
Well, he was out of school for a year, and I don't remember exactly. He started going back part-time in, I think, the second semester. But he'd come up with me in the morning, and he'd just sit in the corner and do nothing.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
No. So for several months.
Several months, for sure.
And he just hung out.
He just hung out.
Okay.
I mean, he was a good kid. He didn't cause any trouble. I'm not usually too fond of people bringing their kids. So I was told I should bring them. So
yeah, and it's your kid, so you know to control it. Okay, so the question on the page in front of us was designed for Michael to ask it. So it's a weird question, but what is your relationship with me?
Well, I think we first met somewhere around 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact year.
2003.
2003.
21 years ago.
21 years ago. And you were, well, in those days, the Overcomers program, Miracle Hill's drug and alcohol addiction recovery programs for men, was co-located inside the Greenville Rescue Mission, of which I was the director. And you came in either as a homeless man that needed to stay, just someplace to stay, and would consider the Overcomers, or came in with the Overcomers. I don't remember which, but that's when we first met.
Yeah, many, many, many moons ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so Miracle Hill's mission statement talks about a couple of things. It's our guiding light for what we do as a ministry, and it tells who we serve, homeless children and adults. And then it goes into how we serve, food and shelter with compassion. Then at the end of it, it points towards kind of the end goal, healthy relationships and stability. But dead in the middle of the mission statement, it talks about us telling people the good news of the gospel. At the end of the day, we are an evangelistic ministry that happens to serve through shelters and programs and things like that. But we want to tell people about Jesus. We want to live Jesus out. So from an evangelistic standpoint, what has been your thinking, philosophy, or approach around reaching the least and the lost?
I've always thought there was a little bit of misconception about people at the rescue mission. And the assumption maybe was that everyone who stays in our emergency shelter or our programs is not a believer. And I guess I found over the years that that's probably not true. Certainly a large percentage of people that enter our care are that. They need the truth of the gospel and find out how they can come to know the Lord in a personal way. And then the other percentage are people who've made that choice already and need to know how to apply Bible principles to their lives to live a grace-filled life and find the peace and purpose that God has for them. And so we always had a blended, sort of a blended approach for that. We wanted to make sure that discipleship was very important for those who knew the Lord. And we wanted to make sure that the offer of the gospel was also very important to those who did not.
Okay. So I can come up with all kinds of anecdotes about things that I saw you do personally, right? Like in an attempt to reach people. One that sticks at the top of my mind, for a very busy man, one of the things that you did, I feel like it was weekly, is you grabbed your rolling cart and you came out into the main hallway and you would fill up a tract holder. I don't know what it would be called. It was a tiny shelf with, at the time, there was 100 maybe different tracts on there. What was your thinking? What were you trying to accomplish in doing that?
Well, I had so many people that always wanted to help me and roll the cart out and put the booklets and the tracts up on the rack. And I purposely always said no, because to me that was a huge part of my ministry, and some pretty cool and wonderful stories happened. Just a very, very small amount of what was up on the rack was evangelistic, deliberately evangelistic, as in gospel tract. What must I do to be saved, or how can I get to heaven? But the majority of the space was reserved for booklets that were put out by Radio Bible Class in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They're most famous, I think, for the booklet, Our Daily Bread. It's a series of 90 devotionals, one for each day. And each little devotional had sort of a thoughtful sentence or phrase, and then a cool story, and then a Bible verse, and I think a prayer at the bottom. And we put those out, and those went very quickly, guys. We were encouraging them along the way to make sure that the Bible was very important to them every day. And that was a way to get them into the Bible. But the other thing that Radio Bible Class did was they published, I don't know how many different title booklets. If I were to guess, it would be over 100. And I had 2 anonymous donors who wanted me to keep that rack full of those various topic booklets, 4 chapters each one, on just different random subjects. And they were very gracious and gave me money to order them and get them up on the rack, which was cool. I was looking around the house and I found one of them called Overcoming Worry.
Mm-hmm.
Strangely, this was my wife's belongings. and maybe there was something she was trying to tell me. But it just, attractive little booklets that you could read in, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 minutes. And it was an opportunity for me to interact with the men at the mission. And some really cool stories happened along the way. I had a guy, I think I filled it maybe once a week. I think you're probably right about that. But I purposely stayed a long time and kept them very, very organized, mainly so I could interact with the people that walked by. It was probably the most public spot in the mission. And I had a guy come by, looked at the rack, and then went down the hallway to leave. And I yelled down the hallway, "Hey, where are you going?" And he said, well, I'm going downtown to get a cup of coffee. I said, where are you going then? And he said, well, I don't know. I may just walk around, or I may come back to the mission, take a nap, may go look for a job. I said, what are you going to do after that? He said, well, after I get a job, I'm going to save up my money and find a place to rent and move out of the mission and try to live a successful life again. I said, where are you going to go then? And he said, I don't know. I'd probably find a girlfriend. We'll get married, have kids. Both of us will have good jobs, and we'll live out into retirement. I said, well, where are you going after that? He said, well, I guess I'm just going to die. And I said, John, where are you going to go after that?
Right.
And it was just an amazing opportunity. He came back down the hallway. He said, I don't know. He said, I have no idea. He said, I think just by you asking the question, what you probably did was make me think that I had a plan for everything except for that.
Really?
I said, well, how about we make a plan for that? And that afternoon, he came to know the Lord. It was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story. Another guy that I can remember came up to the rack and just started staring at it and said, what do I need to read today? I said, I don't know. What are you struggling with? Yeah, I can't remember what his answer was, moral purity or something. And I reached up on the rack and pulled one that said something about moral purity. And pretty glad to get that. The titles of the booklets were so enticing that they would cover most every issue that an adult man would face in his life. So the rack was really important. It was a way to engage with men at the mission other than across a sterile desk, which I didn't like. And just on a friendly way, a lot of guys would come and just stand there and watch and kind of look through the booklets as they're putting them up. And they'd say, well, are you sure you don't need any help? I said, well, this is not about me needing help, but it might be about you needing help. Take a look and see what flips your trigger and take a booklet that you think you'd be interested in. And I was always thankful for the two anonymous donors that kept that going for I don't know how many years, many, many years.
So it was at least as much about the conversations you would have standing at the rack as it was what was going on the rack.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, when I came through the program, I wound up with the coveted job of desk man. Desk man was a great task assignment in the building.
Well, there was a story behind that I don't know that you know.
Tell me.
One of my jobs as the director was to kind of field the team. Everybody that came into the mission, if they didn't have a job in the community, we gave them a task to do, maybe cleaning the building or what you're relating into at the guest information center or in the kitchen or doing something else that made them feel like they were doing something to contribute to their stay in a sense and gave them a sense of value that they had where there was something they could do. And one of the tasks was monitoring and working at the client information center. And that was a very special job. I was the one staff member who was responsible for that area and the people that worked there. And our staff really felt that the guys who worked there should have some, they should be intelligent, they should be able to answer the telephone politely, let men in and out know what documents or pieces of paper or request forms to give them to answer a specific problem. But it was also the place where we assigned people that we wanted to keep our eyes on. It was the one place in all the building where all of our staff all day long were coming in and out of that area and could interact with whoever was sitting at the desk answering the phones and so on. A lot of times we put people that we were a little worried about. And the honest truth is that your stay there was one of those. You were a bit on the hyperactive side, maybe. Mm-hmm. As I remember it, you probably were either an agnostic or an atheist or a little bit of both. And we felt that you would do a good job. You were smart enough, but that's for sure. It was also a place where all of our staff would have the opportunity to interact with you. And, we prayed offline that God would use us somehow to convey truth to your confused life. So that's sort of the background. You were assigned there because we wanted to watch you.
I needed the watching.
You needed the watching.
For sure. So, agnostic would be the right term. Mm-hmm. I don't know what term I would have used then. I think that when I first got there, I would have said atheist. I think very quickly, once I understood what agnostic meant, I would have said agnostic. But hungry.
Yeah.
Hungry for something, right? That was clear.
And it may have been that you were hungry for an argument.
Yep, I had lots of those.
I had a phone call 2 or 3 weeks ago from a guy who was at the mission when you were there. He lives in Asheville. Really nice guy. He sort of became a friend, and is a Facebook friend. And he called me a few weeks ago, and he said, I want to ask you something that I think I remember, but I'm not sure. He said, did you ever say in chapel, and he said, I remember you saying it, that even though it's important where you've been, what you've done, that maybe a greater issue is how well do you finish?
Sure.
And I said, well, yeah, I remember saying that. I said that a lot. He said, well, I've been invited to speak at a funeral of a friend of mine who was riding his bike and got hit by a truck and died. He knew the Lord, carried a Bible in his backpack on the way to work and back all the time. And just a great guy, but he spent several years addicted to drugs and alcohol. He went to some kind of treatment program, and that really worked for him. And he's been clean and sober for 4 years and living right. Mm-hmm. And he said, I thought of what you said in chapel, and I thought maybe that would be a good theme, that even though he was an addict for years, that he finished well. I said, hey, that'd be great. I said, go for that. He said, well, the next question is a little more difficult. He said, is that in the Bible anywhere? I said, wow, I hope so. And I said, well, I can think of several places. The classic story is in the book of Acts, the story of John Mark, who, whatever happened to him, he was doing well on a missionary journey, dropped out, and nobody wanted to take him, and it caused an argument between two preachers of whether he should go on the second missionary journey or not. Anyway, he ends up, whatever happened, we don't know, but he ends up doing well, so that the missionary that started the whole thing said, I need to see him before I die. He's useful to me for the ministry. So that's the best story. I said, there are plenty of other stories in the Bible, the Apostle Paul and others. And I said, do you remember Ryan Duerk by any chance? And he said, well, yes, strange that you'd mention that. I do. I said, are you aware that Ryan is Miracle Hill's president and CEO and has been for about 5 years? He said, no, I don't think I knew that. I said, well, as a matter of fact, this week, I just spoke briefly at the release of Ryan's book that he wrote, that's the story of his life, called Counterfeit Peace. He said, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I said, look, you've got to get that book. Get it on Amazon. Take it with you on your travels. That's a tremendous story. He said, I'll never forget Ryan. He said, we used to sit outside together, and Ryan would tell me all about this agnostic atheist stuff that he believed. And I would try to tell him about Jesus and try to let him know that there's a better way. He said, I just never really knew whether I was getting through or not.
Good.
And here's what the guy said. He said, I really thought he just wanted to argue with me, that he was looking for a debate partner. I said, well, when you read the book, you'll see that whole story and how that story came out, which goes to your question about the funeral. Finishing well is really important. And Ryan has more stories than a lot of people would have, but he's finishing well.
Well, still got to finish well. Right? Both of us do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not over yet. But yeah, I feel like I'm going to ask you when we get offline. I think I know who it was. But I will ask you after we hang this up. You write it down so I don't forget. So, okay. So I get at the client information desk at the time. Now it's the guest information center. And you're right. I had a lot of interactions with staff that I otherwise probably would not have had that many interactions with, which was, man, it was beneficial for two reasons. Number one, I got the added benefit of all that extra wisdom. Number two, made me feel like I was doing something that had value.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Made
Me feel like I had value, or I was adding value in some way. And there was a coffee maker up there too.
That's right.
Huge hopes. So you and I had lots of conversations about a variety of different topics. And you're right. At the time, I thought I had really strong apologetics against Jesus. But you drop off this book, More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell. Why did you drop off that book?
I had asked our staff specifically regarding you, not to let you get them pulled into debates and arguments and stuff like that. I didn't think that would be helpful either to them or to you. And it was a Friday afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock, and I was going to leave and go home for the weekend. And I stood in my office and I thought, I don't know that anybody is really getting through to Ryan. So I reached over on my shelf and I picked up a book and stood with it in my hand and prayed, Lord, help this book to be a blessing to Ryan. And so I took the book out to the client information center, and I remember just throwing it on the desk and saying something like, here, Ryan, here's something to read. I think you'll enjoy it. Next week, tell me what you thought. And then I walked out the door and went home and prayed during the weekend that it would be a good experience.
So it was God directed. No other reason. And did you have a bunch of these?
I did.
I do too. I've done the same thing.
Yes.
Dozens of times at that point. and have dozens of copies. I probably have a dozen of copies in my office right now. What I think so great about this book, certainly the Lord used it to help shift the axis of my life. But it's really simple arguments, right? And to your point, I wanted to get in the weeds on everything. Really, man, as a young Christian, really struggled with that, right? I got into the weeds, right? Spent way too much time thinking about eschatology or, theological issues that in the grand scheme of things don't mean a hell of beans and probably were not a great use of my time. But similarly, that was almost a blockade intellectually for me when it came to Christ. I was overcomplicating everything. And Mr. McDowell lays things out very simply, right? He appeases to a simpler view of things and does it with logic that's hard to argue with. So between the tracks and the relationships in the hallway and the God-directed books, you're starting to see some intentional efforts, evangelistic efforts. I think you and I could very easily agree that there's not a one-size-fits-all method for evangelism, period, much less within the confines of a shelter. But what would be like the main tools that you would say that rescue missions deploy?
Well, the obvious one that everybody would think of is chapel. Back then we had chapel early in the morning and also in the evening. And our chapel speakers were generally pastors, sometimes staff members. I know I spoke once a week in chapel sometime, I think, and other volunteers. And I had the responsibility of sort of fielding the team for chapel speakers. I was real concerned about that. I think there were three categories that chapel speakers fit into. And maybe the three different types fit the clients, maybe at the mission. There were a lot of chapels that were very directive. You need to do this. And they were loud and fiery. And I don't know how many of the mission guests were responding to chapel speakers like that. There was a second group that I think I'd call them the we group. Those we mission guests and chapel speakers alike are in the same boat. We're all sinners needing a savior. We've all sinned. And just kind of making the offer of the gospel something that all of us need. Chapel speakers, because they stood on a platform, shouldn't be on a pedestal. They were as lost as anybody before they heard the gospel. And then other chapel speakers were kind of the I type. They were men who had gone through tough situations and maybe through programs like the Overcomers and have been clean, sober, living right for half a dozen or so years. And they would come and give a testimony of what God did for them, sometimes through the mission, sometimes through Overcomers, sometimes through others. And I tried to get really good chapel speakers that would personalize, I've been where you've been. I know what you're going through. There isn't a thing you've done that I haven't done, but Jesus came into my life. and they were just a good bunch of people. We had a policy for chapel speakers that they were supposed to agree to. Just some things to be careful about. Not giving money and stuff to mission guests, but also to try to keep it short and sweet. Probably a 20-minute sermon and a chapel service is more than enough. Don't need to do a whole hour. That's probably not considering the people that you're speaking to ask them to sit and listen to you for about an hour. I go to a church where the average Sunday morning service is probably about 45 minutes, and I love it. But that wouldn't be appropriate, I don't think, for a mission chapel. Secondly, I think we had staff and volunteers that were really, really good at presenting the gospel in creative ways. Some of it was confrontational. Some of it was not. First thing that happened when a guy checked into the mission or the overcomers is they sat down with one of our counselors and did an intake interview. A lot of it was just information to our records so that we, if they had a medical bracelet or if they had some issues or a little bit about their job history so that we could help them maybe find a job, just important questions. But in the middle of that was a question about spiritual life. Where are you spiritually? What do you know about Jesus Christ? And that was a good opportunity in asking questions to sort of find out where the guys were and how to proceed. We had one volunteer that just stood out in my mind so much. I love to hire retired old men to volunteer at the mission. They just brought so much. And one of the guys that volunteered had been the chief financial officer for a local bank. His office was on the 20th floor of some big building in town, and he retired, and he was a friend from church, and he came to see me. He said, "Tell me what I can do to help as a volunteer here at the mission." And I said, "I don't know. What do you want to do? You want to teach finance?" He said, "Oh, no, please not that again." I said, here's something I don't think you'd like. We have guys checking into the mission every day. And sometimes it takes a little while for our counselors to really sit down and talk seriously with them and create a plan. Would you all be interested in meeting with those guys when you come in and just one-on-one kind of just try to find out the answers to 3 questions? What brought you here? And where do you want to go when you leave here? And how do you think the mission can help you get there? So that's kind of the thought. You'd be digging up a lot of good information that would help us. And then maybe you could pray for them and just talk to them as the Lord would lead you. He said, "I'd love to do that." And so every Thursday afternoon he came in, and usually there were 8 or 9 guys that had checked in the week before. Some had seen their counselors before already. And he would just sit there. He had a notebook and a pen, and he introduced himself, and he said, I'm a volunteer. I don't work here and they don't pay me. I just am here because I care about people. What brought you here? And they tell their story, and say, well, if you're going to be here for a while, they hope you'll be here for 90 days. What are you going to do when you get out? And typical answers, I want to have a job and a place to live and have some security about my life. And then, well, how can the mission help you? What can I do? Is there something I could pray for you about? And that was sort of the golden moment for him, because guys would really open up. He sensed he really cared. He was going to write down whatever they said. And they said, well, I wish you'd pray that when I get out of here and have a job and a place to live, that I wouldn't fall back into the same traps of sin. And he'd write that down. And I said, and pray for my mother. She's getting older and she's not all that well. He'd write that down. And then he'd say, okay, well, let's pray about that. He'd pray for them. And often he would present the gospel if he felt they were really, really open to something more. And then the next week he'd come back and he'd talk to maybe 9 different guys that had checked in that week. But he would always see if any of the guys from the week before were there. And he'd bring them back in. And he said, I've been praying for you, praying that when you get out of here, you won't fall back into the same poor choices. And tell me how your mother is. And the guys just really thought that was so cool that he would care enough not just to talk to them the first time, but would want to revisit those issues. And then he prayed for them again. I mean, just wonderful opportunities, one-on-one, to try to get some time with a guy who really needs some help. We had a lot of literature at the mission, not just the Read Your Bible class booklets and tracts, but we tried to make sure that Bibles were available. Sure. Guys, I think for overcomers, we worked hard, and I think our staff bought some of them to make sure each overcomer had a study Bible that they could have for their own.
I still have mine.
And
falling apart, and I never use it.
Yeah,
but I still do own it.
And we had small portions of the Bible, like the Gospel of John and Psalms and Proverbs, that we handed out a lot. Had a library in the main hallway of the mission. Had a lot of secular books, Clive Cussler novels, but there were plenty of Christian books there for the guys to read on subjects we thought they'd be interested in. And then we had a lot of veterans that were mission guests. So we had a lot of books that would have all the tanks of World War II, or airplanes, or the Wild West, or a lot of books that had deep thinking that you'd have to read through, and also a lot of books that had pictures that guys could kind of remember stuff from their childhood. Had some classes that were optional. I think, I don't remember whether I taught it or not. I think I did. Sort of a basics for believers. Again, it was to pick up the discipleship thing. In other words, if you know the Lord, here's what that means. And here's stuff that you can consider that would be part of what we would call just a normal Christian life. And I know that one of our counselors did sort of an apologetics class that was optional for men in our emergency shelter, where they talk about some of the things in More Than a Carpenter, some of the issues. They didn't use the book. One of our chapel speakers, another retired, very prominent businessman. He was a chapel speaker, And a lot of times he would want to speak have a series every week for 6 weeks. And he found a book that he liked. It was a good book on heaven. And so he bought, 50 copies of the book himself and handed them out in chapel so that the guys could follow along. And they studied through that week after week. And then he had a follow-up class in our conference room for anybody who wanted to discuss it further. Just a lot of good opportunities to provide literature.
It's the Randy Alcorn.
Yeah, with Randy.
Yep, I remember it.
Yeah, on heaven.
Yep.
He was just such a generous guy, and he was also the guy who was concerned about our library. He would go to the Miracle Hill thrift stores, and he would sort the books, and he would take boxes and boxes of books that he thought Shepherd's Gate would like, or the Mission would like, or the Overcomers would like, and he would drop them off at the facilities, and he would sort of rotate them in and out of our libraries that each of us have. That was pretty cool. And he was an avid reader. He knew what books were good for a mission library and which ones were not.
If I remember correctly, that started, he wanted to make sure that every facility had a set of the Left Behind series. My memory serves me.
Yes.
That's why he started rifling through these big boxes of books.
Yeah.
And then it evolved into him just finding good literature for the facilities.
Yeah, he'd call me on the phone and say, I'm on my way to the mission. Can you meet me in the parking lot? We'll go through these books. And there was some that he got that I didn't think would do well. And some that I really, really thought. He found a lot of antique books that really, some of the classic pieces of literature. He thought the mission should have several of those for guys to read, and they did.
So I feel like one of the things that the Big C Church does poorly in America is this idea of evangelism. And I think, frankly, people are intimidated by it, right? It's not, in 2024, it's not normal to go door to door. It's not normal to talk to a stranger about anything, for that matter. So, I remember a couple years ago, we had like a missions day with church, and there was 50 volunteer opportunities on it. They were all different types of things: paint the fence, wash the house. And the one that nobody wanted to go do was evangelism at coffee shops. It was like people were much more willing to go sign up for the paint the fence group than they were on the evangelism at Starbucks group. So, what encouragement or advice would you give somebody who maybe is a believer that maybe is uncomfortable with sharing the gospel, to encourage them that they can, or that they could, with some thought behind it?
Well, you do have to think about your own personality, what you're good at doing, and to the audience, it's if you're not real good at apologetics and defending the faith, you may not want to go to a college coffee house and sit down and discuss the issues of life if you're not comfortable doing that. Finding a way that you can connect, just asking simple questions. One of the ways I was in our chapel speakers policy is we didn't want chapel speakers if the service was at 7:00 at night. We didn't want them getting there at 6:55, and then if it was over at 7:30, run out the back door at 7:30. Our preference was to come early and stay late, and to find a way to engage the people who came early to find a good chapel seat, and to hang around after work and try to engage the people that maybe had questions. And, for a chapel speaker to say, hey, I'm going to hang around for a few minutes afterward and love to get to meet you and talk to you. And that just always leads to, because there are plenty of guys that would want to do that. I don't know whether you call it friendship, evangelism, but coming in and yelling at people in chapel and then leaving. Never thought that was the best way to do things.
Certainly was not effective with me. The youth group, I didn't care for the youth group.
Yep. The youth group was a vestige of the past. In the early days, I think that was the preferred method of evangelism. And the thought that a chapel speaker would ask questions or entertain discussions or interact with the audience, that was kind of brand new.
Okay.
That was my preferred way. I never liked to stand behind the pulpit. I always got a stool and moved down onto the floor with the men and just sat and looked at them and tried to have some kind of an interactive discussion about that. What do you think about that? Tell me how that makes you feel. Churches have to find the right way to do that. I don't know that door-to-door evangelism is the best way anymore. You may find
a shotgun in your face.
You may find a shotgun in your face, or like some people, maybe they wouldn't answer the door.
Yeah.
It could be a waste of time for everybody. But finding the thing that engages people, the common thread that you can talk about, I think is the most helpful thing.
Yeah, I think that's when in doubt, your own testimony is probably the most effective method. Like, you don't have to be a book-learned human to share what God's done in your life.
Right.
And you can always say, if somebody says, well, what does the Bible say about this? You can always say, I don't know, but we can find out together.
Yeah.
And grab your Bible. Now you got a relationship, right? Now you have an opportunity. Years ago, my pastor at the time, he challenged us at church one night. He said, I'm going to give you guys an evangelism tool. And so here's what he said. He said, when the waiter or waitress brings you your meal at the restaurant, say, I like to give thanks for I eat. Is there anything I can pray for you for? And so I started doing it. This was many years ago. And I do it to this day. And about a third of the time, people are visibly upset and don't want anything to do with that. Then they say no and walk away. About a third of the time, you get the deer in headlights and they don't know what to say. But about a third of the time, people open up.
Yep.
And they share something, right? Like they're going through something or their mom's going through something. And then you get to have this super cool dialogue. It's like a very non-offensive way of saying, I trust in God. And how can I trust in God for you in the moment? Anyways, testimony would be my best piece of advice to somebody. Sure. Just share what's happened in your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost you anything. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for talking. Thanks for being you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the Miracle Hill podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share on your platform of choice. You can also visit us on our website, miraclehill.org, to find out more about us and how you can support us in our mission. We can't wait for you to join us again next time.